A woman was dragging bags, returning from work, making her way with two transfers while at home her husband didn't give a damn, lying on the couch for the second year. But suddenly she heard a man's phone conversation on the bus that turned her whole life upside down. Greetings to you. Every family has its heroes and its victims. Today I will tell a story about how these roles can switch places. The November evening enveloped the city in damp grayness, like an old blanket that should have been washed long ago, but hands never get around to it. Valentina Escalona stood at the entrance to the grocery store, where bright neon signs reflected in puddles on the wet asphalt, creating an illusion of celebration where there hadn't been one for a long time. The bags in her hands grew heavier with each purchase, but not from the weight of the products, from that familiar heaviness that had settled in her chest 2 years ago and hadn't left her for a minute since. At 38, Valentina had learned to buy food automatically, like a robot programmed for family survival. Bread, rice, pasta, sausages, vegetables, oil. The list in her head hadn't changed for months because there was no money, strength, or desire for experiments. She knew that at home no one would ask what she brought. No one would thank her for dragging heavy bags across the entire city with 2 transfers every day after 8 hours in the office. It was as natural as breathing and just as unnoticed by those around her. The cashier, a girl about 20 with bright pink nail polish, was scanning items with the look of someone who dreams of being anywhere but here. Valentina looked at those nails and remembered when she last painted her own. It seemed like it was at the corporate party 2 years ago, before their family life turned into endless waiting for a miracle that never came. The bags cut into her fingers with thin handles, but Valentina didn't buy a wheeled cart, though she had been planning to for a long time. Each time she postponed this purchase, telling herself she could manage without it. Actually, somewhere deep in her subconscious, she hoped that soon everything would change, that Alonzo would find a job. And then there would be no need to save on every little thing. But months turned into years, and she still hadn't bought the cart. At the bus stop, people crowded together, tired from the workday, each immersed in their own thoughts, their own problems. The bus arrived with the characteristic screech of brakes, and the driver, a middle-aged man with a perpetually displeased face, opened the door with such an expression as if he were doing all the passengers a favor. Valentina squeezed inside, holding her bags in front of her like a shield, and found a seat by the window in the middle of the cabin. The windows were fogged from people's breath and the humidity outside, and the city beyond the window turned into blurred spots of light. The cabin smelled of wet clothes, cheap perfume, and something indefinable that always exists in public transport in rainy weather. Valentina leaned her head against the cool glass and closed her eyes, allowing herself for a few minutes to simply exist, not thinking about what awaited her at home. She thought about how this journey home used to be a time of anticipation. Before, when Alonzo worked as a sales manager at a construction company, when he had business trips and bonuses, when he sometimes met her right at the entrance with a bouquet of flowers or just to help carry the bags. Then she hurried home because she knew someone was waiting for her there, that her arrival was important, not only because she brought food and cleaned the apartment. Now the road home had become time she wanted to stretch as long as possible, because at home on the couch lay a person who was once her husband and now had turned into a permanent inhabitant of the living room, so fused with the sofa upholstery that he seemed to have become part of the furniture. Alonzo had been lying there for 2 years, since the day he was fired due to staff reduction. And since then, every day he repeated the same phrase about looking for work, but not being able to find anything suitable. The bus swayed on the bumps, and Valentina thought that her life had turned into the same kind of ride over potholes, only without hope of reaching the destination. Next to her sat a woman about 50 who was quickly typing something on her phone, probably solving work issues. Behind her, a young mother was rocking a child, quietly humming a lullaby. Everyone was immersed in their own world, their own concerns, and Valentina thought that perhaps each of these people also had their own Alonso at home, their own burden of problems they had to deal with alone. She remembered what he was like at the beginning of their relationship 15 years ago. Energetic, ambitious, with burning eyes and plans for the future. He said then that he would build them a house, buy a car, that they would have a beautiful life. In the first years of marriage, it seemed like everything was going according to plan. Children, an apartment on mortgage, family trips to his parents' dacha. The ordinary life of an ordinary family, which had its joys and difficulties, but there was hope for better. Then something began to break. At first imperceptibly in small things. Alonso became more irritable, began complaining about work, about management, about not being appreciated. Valentina supported him, said that everything would work out, that they just needed to be patient. But patience stretched for years, and then what happened, happened. The dismissal became not the end of a streak of failures, but the beginning of a real nightmare. The first months of unemployment, Alonso really looked for work. He went to interviews, called acquaintances, studied job listings on the internet. Valentina believed this was temporary, that soon everything would return to normal. But months passed and there were no suitable offers. Either the salary was too small, or the schedule was inconvenient, or the team wasn't right. Gradually, the searches became more and more formal, and the excuses more and more sophisticated. Now, 2 years later, Alonso had turned into an expert at finding reasons why this or that job didn't suit him. He could talk for hours about how difficult it was to find a decent position for someone of his level, how employers didn't understand the value of experienced personnel, how young people were ready to work for small money and were spoiling the job market. At the same time, any suggestions from Valentina to take at least temporary work were met as personal insults. The bus stopped at a traffic light, and a group of students entered the cabin, loudly discussing plans for the weekend. Their laughter and energy sharply contrasted with the general mood of tired passengers, and Valentina caught herself envying them. Not their youth, but their ability to enjoy small things, make plans, believe that something good awaited them ahead. When did she last make plans? When did she last look forward to weekends? Not because she could rest from work, but because she could spend time with family. Before, weekends were time for joint activities, walks in the park with children, family dinners during which everyone talked about the past week. Now weekends had become simply 2 days when she could sleep longer and manage to do all the household chores she didn't have time for on weekdays. The children, Sebastian and Paloma, 16 and 14 years old respectively, had long learned not to count on their father. They turned to Valentina with all questions, from money for school needs to help with homework. Alonso was formally present in their lives, but his presence was more physical than emotional. He could talk to the children for hours about how important it was to study well, how difficult it was to find work without education. But when it came to real help or support, he always found reasons why he couldn't do it right now. Valentina felt how the children were gradually losing respect for their father, and this broke her heart. She tried to defend Alonso in front of the children, explain that Daddy was going through a difficult period, that they needed to understand and support him. But teenagers saw things simpler and more honestly than adults. They saw a man who lay on the couch all day while their mother worked and carried the whole house on her shoulders. And their logic was ruthless in its simplicity. The bus was approaching her stop, and Valentina began preparing to get off. The bags seemed even heavier than in the store, and ahead was another transfer and a 20-minute walk home. She looked at her reflection in the dark window and saw a tired, middle-aged woman with dull eyes and downturned corners of her mouth. When did she become like this? When did she stop taking care of herself? Stop enjoying small things? Stop believing that life could change for the better? At the second transfer, she had to wait for the bus for almost half an hour. The rain intensified, and Valentina stood in the cramped bus shelter, pressing her bags to herself and feeling fatigue wash over her in waves. Next to her stood equally tired people, each thinking about their own things, each hurrying home to their own problems and joys. She thought that they were all like passengers on a big ship sailing to an unknown destination, and each was busy with their own affairs, not noticing what was happening overboard. Finally, the bus arrived, and Valentina found a seat at the back of the cabin. Only a few stops remained until home, but each minute dragged like an hour. She knew what awaited her at home, and this knowledge pressed on her shoulders no less than the heavy bags. An apartment where in the living room on the couch lay Alonso in the same tracksuit she had left him in that morning. Next to the couch on the coffee table, a plate with breakfast leftovers that he hadn't cleaned up. The TV was showing news or some movie, but Alonzo was looking at the screen with the empty gaze of a person who hadn't seen what was happening around him for a long time. The children would be in their rooms, each busy with their own affairs. Sebastian at the computer, playing some online game with friends, Paloma doing homework or chatting with classmates on social networks. They had gotten used to Daddy lying on the couch while Mama came home from work tired and irritated. This had become the norm of their life, and Valentina understood that the children perceived this family model as the only possible one. The bus stopped at her stop, and Valentina slowly rose from her seat. The bags seemed to have become even heavier during the trip, and she thought that this was some special magic of fatigue. Everything becomes heavier by the end of the day. The rain had almost stopped, but the air was saturated with moisture, and each breath was difficult. She had to walk home along a familiar road, past the same houses, the same courtyards, past the same grocery store, on the first floor of a 9-story building where she sometimes bought something forgotten at the big supermarket, past the playground where her children once played, and now other children of other parents played, past the bench where she and Alonzo once sat on summer evenings when he walked her home from work, and they weren't in a hurry to get home, enjoying each other's company. All these places held memories of another life, of the time when they were happy or at least believed that happiness was possible. Now these same places seemed like decorations for a play that had long ended, but the actors out of habit continued to come on stage and play their roles before an empty auditorium. The entrance greeted her with the smell of dampness and the sound of the working elevator. Valentina climbed to the 5th floor on foot because with heavy bags it was cramped in the elevator, and she didn't have the patience to wait for it to be free. On each floor she stopped to grab the bags more comfortably and catch her breath. Behind the doors of apartments, sounds of other people's lives could be heard. Conversations, laughter, music, the clinking of dishes. Ordinary sounds of ordinary families who lived their lives and didn't suspect that behind the neighboring door, a woman climbed the stairs every day with a weight that had long exceeded the limit of human possibilities. On the landing in front of her apartment, Valentina stopped and listened. Behind the door it was quiet. Only the muffled sound of the TV could be heard. No one was rushing to meet her. No one was waiting at the door, ready to help with bags or simply hug after a difficult day. She took out her keys and opened the lock, preparing to meet the house that had long ceased to be a home in the full sense of the word. The hallway greeted her with scattered shoes and Alonzo's jacket, which he, as usual, had thrown on the floor instead of hanging on the hook. Valentina mechanically picked up the jacket and hung it in place, put her shoes in the shoe rack, and went to the kitchen to sort the purchases. In the living room on the couch lay Alonzo, exactly in the same position she had left him in that morning. A gray tracksuit that was once his favorite, and now had become the uniform of the unemployed. Next to him on the coffee table stood the same plate with breakfast leftovers that he had promised to clean up yesterday. The TV was showing evening news, but Alonzo was looking at the screen with the absent gaze of a person who saw not what was happening on screen, but some thoughts of his own. Alonzo turned his head toward her and said the usual, "Hi, how was work?" The question sounded formal, like a daily ritual that needed to be performed to maintain the appearance of normal relations. Valentina knew that he wasn't listening to the answer, that he wasn't interested in how her day went, but in the opportunity to demonstrate that he hadn't completely disconnected from family life. "Fine," she answered just as formally, and went to the kitchen to put away the groceries. Alonzo didn't offer to help, didn't ask what she had bought, didn't wonder if it was hard to carry the bags. This would have been strange because in 2 years he had never done this once. But each time Valentina hoped that something would change, that he would get up from the couch and say something human, something real. In the kitchen she began putting groceries in their places, and each movement was polished to automatism. Bread in the bread box, pasta and rice in the cupboard with other cereals. Everything in its place, everything in order, established back in those times when this order made sense. From the children's rooms came familiar sounds. Sebastian was talking to someone on the internet, discussing strategy in another game. Paloma was listening to music and, judging by the sounds, cleaning her room. The children lived their own lives in which parents played an increasingly formal role as suppliers of food, clothing, and pocket money. Valentina looked at the clock. 7:30 in the evening. She needed to cook dinner, then wash dishes, help the children with homework if needed, iron shirts for tomorrow, check if the children had done their homework. The usual program of an ordinary evening that repeated day after day, without changes and without hope for changes. She opened the refrigerator and looked at its contents, trying to decide what to cook for dinner. The choice wasn't rich, but she had learned to cook something resembling variety from simple products. Pasta with sausages, rice with vegetables. The repertoire of family dinners hadn't changed for months, but no one complained. Perhaps because there was no one to complain to. While the food was being prepared, Valentina thought that her life had turned into an endless repetition of the same actions. Morning rise, breakfast, trip to work, a workday that stretched like gum. The trip home with heavy bags, cooking dinner, cleaning, washing, ironing. And so every day, every week, every month, life had turned into a closed circle from which she saw no exit. When dinner was ready, she called the family to the table. The children came out of their rooms. Alonso reluctantly got up from the couch. They sat at the table silently, each thinking about their own things. Sebastian told something about school. Paloma complained about a math test. Alonso ate silently, occasionally inserting general phrases about how important it was to study well. After dinner, the children went to their rooms. Alonso returned to the couch, and Valentina began washing dishes. Standing at the sink, she looked out the window at the courtyard, where dog walkers were walking under the streetlights and rare passers-by hurried about their business. The ordinary life of an ordinary evening, in which everyone was busy with their own affairs. And no one suspected that in the window on the 5th floor stood a woman thinking that her life had long turned into existence. Late in the evening, when the children were already asleep and Alonso was dozing in front of the TV, Valentina lay in bed looking at the ceiling. Next to her peacefully snored her husband, who was once her support and backbone, and now had become another concern, another obligation in the endless list of things to do. She thought about when she stopped being a wife and became simply service staff in her own home, when their relationship turned into formal coexistence of two people who lived under one roof but in different worlds. When did she last feel loved and desired, and not just needed as a source of income and free housekeeper? In the morning, she was awakened by the phone ringing in the hallway. Alonso was talking to someone in a muffled voice, and Valentina involuntarily listened to his words. "No, I'm not ready yet. I need more time to think. It's not as simple as it seems." The conversation ended and Valentina heard Alonso return to the living room and turn on the TV. She lay in bed thinking about what kind of call that was and why her husband spoke in such a strange tone. But then she decided it was another excuse, another attempt to justify his inaction to himself. A new day began exactly like all the previous ones, and Valentina prepared for it to pass exactly the same way. But somewhere deep in her soul, hope flickered that sooner or later, something had to change, because it couldn't continue like this anymore. The morning light seeped through the tulle curtains, turning the kitchen into something like an aquarium where all objects seemed blurred and unreal. Valentina stood at the stove, mechanically stirring porridge in a pot, and thought about yesterday's phone conversation. Alonso's words spun in her head like autumn leaves in the wind, giving no peace. What was that offer he had refused? And why did he speak in such a tone, as if it was about something serious? Alonso appeared in the kitchen in the same tracksuit, disheveled after sleep, and sat at the table with the look of a person whom life had offended unfairly and irrevocably. "Alonso," Valentina began, not turning from the stove, "someone called you last night. What are you talking about? And this?" Alonso scratched his head and poured himself coffee. "An acquaintance offered something, but not right, you understand. Not my level at all." "What level?" Valentina turned to him, and in her voice sounded fatigue from endless excuses. "Alonso, we need money. Any money. Sebastian has a museum excursion. Paloma's sneakers fell apart. I can't handle it alone." Alonso winced as if she had said something indecent. "Valentina, but you understand that I can't go work just anywhere. I have experience, education. If I agree to something below my level, then it will be even harder to find normal work later." "And now it's easy?" Irony sounded in Valentina's voice. bitter as wormwood. 2 years of searching, and where are the results? The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of the children. Sebastian flew into the kitchen with the look of someone late for an important meeting, although there was still half an hour before school. "Mom, I need money for the excursion. $15. I need to turn it in today." Paloma appeared after him, demonstratively limping. "And I need new sneakers." "Look," she showed her mother her shoes where there really was a gaping hole near the big toe. "I stepped in a puddle yesterday, got my whole foot wet." Valentina looked at her husband, who had become absorbed in studying the contents of his cup, as if answers to all questions of the universe could be found there. The children also looked at their father, but without much hope. They had long learned that all financial issues were resolved exclusively through Mom. "All right," Valentina sighed. "I'll give you money for the excursion. But with the sneakers, you'll have to wait until payday." "Mom, but I have a hole," Paloma protested. "You'll endure a week." Alonso finally raised his head from the cup. "Children, you understand that Daddy is going through a difficult period right now. Finding work isn't as simple as it seems, but soon everything will work out." "Yes, Dad," Sebastian answered indifferently, taking the money from his mother. "You've been saying that for 2 years already." In this phrase from a 16-year-old teenager, there was more truth than in all the excuses of an adult man. Alonso pressed his lips together, but didn't answer anything. What could he say? That in 2 years of searching, he had become an expert in rejections and reasons why offers didn't suit him. The children ran off to school, leaving tension in the kitchen that could be cut with a knife. Valentina silently finished her breakfast, thinking about the coming day. At work, she had to close the monthly report. At home, the eternal whirlwind of household chores. And between work and home, those damn 2 transfers that turned the journey into a real endurance test. "Valentina," Alonso suddenly said, "don't think I don't care. I just can't take the first job that comes along. I have principles." "Principles," Valentina repeated, and in this word sounded all the pain of accumulated years. "What about the principles of a husband and father? Principles about family being a responsibility?" Alonso got up from the table and headed to the living room. "I take care of the family. I study job listings every day, make calls, go to interviews. That's also work." Valentina looked after him and thought that she no longer remembered when he last went to an interview. A month ago? 2? Maybe even more. Time in their house had begun to flow somehow differently, slowly and viscously, like honey in cold weather. At work, the day turned out to be especially hard. Colleagues during lunch break were discussing weekend plans. Someone was going to the theater, someone to a restaurant, someone to friend's dacha. Valentina listened to these conversations and understood that her life had long turned into a closed triangle. Home, work, store. When did she last go to the theater? To the movies? To an exhibition? Even just to a cafe with a friend? "Valentina," called Camilla from the neighboring department, "why are you so quiet? Do you have weekend plans?" "Household chores," Valentina answered briefly. "Washing, cleaning, cooking for the week ahead." "Come on," Camilla waved her hand. "Live a little for yourself. If your husband doesn't like it, let him do the household chores himself." "If only you knew," thought Valentina. "If only you knew that my husband doesn't do anything at all except study the TV program guide." After work, she stopped by her friend Rocio, who worked as an administrator in a beauty salon nearby. Rocio was 3 years younger than Valentina, but had enough life experience for 2. 2 years ago, she divorced her alcoholic husband, and now was raising her son alone. Rocio greeted her with open arms. "Valentina, I haven't seen you in 100 years. How are things? Although I can see by your face, not great." They sat in a small cafe next to the salon, ordered coffee, and Valentina suddenly realized that she didn't remember when she last sat in a cafe just like that, for pleasure. "Rocio, I'm going crazy," she confessed. "Alonso has been lying on the couch for 2 years. I'm carrying everything alone. Work, home, and children, and he tells me about principles." Rocio snorted. "He has principles. Does he have the principle of being a man? The principle of being responsible for family? He says he's looking for work." that he can't take just anything. Valentina, Rocio leaned across the table, listen to me carefully. I went through this. My ex was also a great seeker of worthy work. Only he searched for it exclusively at the bottom of a bottle. But the result is the same. A woman turns into a slave in her own home. But the children? The children will grow up and draw conclusions. Your son will think that a man can do nothing, and your daughter, that a woman should carry everything on her shoulders. Do you want such a future for them? Valentina was silent, stirring her coffee. Rocio was right, but admitting this meant admitting that 15 years of marriage had turned into a farce. You know, Rocio continued, yes, it's hard for me alone. Yes, money is often not enough, but at least I live. I don't just exist. I wake up in the morning and know that the day belongs to me and my son, not some overgrown baby on the couch. What if he changes? In 2 years, he hasn't changed. He'll never change. Valentina, a man only changes when the consequences of his behavior become painful for him. And while you're carrying everything on your shoulders, why should he change? The conversation with Rocio spun in her head all the way home. Her friend offered to introduce her to a man who had seen Valentina in the cafe and was interested in who this beautiful woman was. Rocio urged her to at least meet, just talk, remember what male attention was like. I'm married, Valentina objected. Are you sure? Rocio asked. Marriage is when two people care for each other. What do you have? One-sided care? The bus was stuffy and crowded, as always during rush hour. Valentina found a seat by the window and leaned against the cool glass. Outside the window, the familiar city flowed by. The same houses, the same courtyards, the same stores. All the same, day after day, year after year. Even the route didn't change. The same stops, the same transfers. Next to her sat an elderly woman with a grandson about 6 years old. The boy was enthusiastically telling his grandmother about school, about friends, about weekend plans. The grandmother listened attentively, asked questions, laughed at his stories. Valentina looked at them and thought when she last talked with her own children like that, when she listened to them not between other things, not while cooking dinner or checking homework, but just like that with interest and attention. A man about 45 entered the bus cabin, settled in a free seat, and immediately took out his phone. Valentina at first didn't pay attention to him, but then involuntarily began listening to his conversation. Darling, I understand that it's hard for you alone with the children, he said into the phone, and his voice was full of sincere concern. But I can't leave Mom now. She's very sick. The doctor said surgery is inevitable, and recovery will be long. Valentina felt something tighten in her chest. This unknown man was apologizing to his wife for not being able to be nearby because he was caring for his sick mother. And her husband for 2 years couldn't apologize for turning his wife into the family's sole breadwinner. I know we planned to go to the sea, the man continued, but now all the money will go to treatment. Sorry we have to postpone vacation. You're the most patient and understanding woman in the world. Without you, I definitely wouldn't cope. The words most patient and understanding woman in the world echoed with pain in Valentina's heart. When did Alonso last say something like that to her? When did he thank her for patience? When did he call her the best? She strained her memory but couldn't remember anything. The last 2 years, their conversations had been reduced to discussing household problems and his complaints about life's injustice. Thank you for everything, the man said into the phone. For not scolding me, for understanding. I'm so grateful to fate for meeting you. I love you madly. Valentina turned to the window, feeling treacherous stinging in her eyes. This random conversation had become a mirror in which she saw what she was deprived of in her own marriage. The man was apologizing to his wife for forced difficulties, thanking her for understanding, speaking of love. And what did Alonso tell her? That he was looking for worthy work and that he had principles. The man finished the conversation and put away his phone. Valentina stealthily looked at him. An ordinary middle-aged person, tired after a workday, but in his eyes was warmth that was so lacking in her own home. He loved his wife, valued her, didn't take for granted her patience and support. The bus approached the man's stop. He got up and left. Valentina followed him with her gaze and thought, what if Alonso had gotten into a difficult situation, not through his own fault? What if he had to care for sick parents or solve some force majeure circumstances? She would have supported him, understood, forgiven. But Alonso hadn't gotten into a difficult situation. He had created it himself with his unwillingness to change anything. A few more minutes remained until her stop, and Valentina used this time to think about what she had heard. The stranger's conversation showed her what the relationship between husband and wife should look like during a difficult period: mutual support, gratitude, apologies for caused inconveniences. And what was in her family? One-sided support, accepting the situation as a given, and endless excuses. At home, the usual picture greeted her. Alonso on the couch, the same plate on the coffee table, the same absent gaze at the TV. Only today this picture was perceived differently, through the prism of the conversation heard on the bus. "Hi," said Alonso without looking away from the screen. "How are things?" "Fine," answered Valentina and went to the kitchen. But things were not fine at all. Something had changed in her perception. Something had shifted in the depths of consciousness. The conversation on the bus had become a catalyst for a process that had been ripening in her for a long time, but which she had been afraid of. She was cooking dinner and thinking that life was passing by. While she was carrying the burden of someone else's irresponsibility, her own life was flowing away like water through her fingers. The children would grow up and leave, youth would pass completely, and she would remain in this closed circle of obligations and disappointments. In the evening, when the children had gone to their rooms and Alonso had settled in front of the TV, Valentina tried to honestly answer the question, what did she feel for her husband? Love or just habit, pity, or irritation that she carefully suppressed? She remembered their first meeting, first date, marriage proposal. Alonso was different then, energetic, purposeful, caring, or she was different, young, in love, ready to close her eyes to shortcomings. It was hard to understand what had changed. He, she, or both of them. Late in the evening, lying in bed next to her already sleeping husband, Valentina thought about the conversation on the bus, about how the man thanked his wife for patience, how he apologized for difficulties, how he spoke of love. These simple words which she had been deprived of for so long that she had forgotten what they should be like. Sleep wouldn't come, and Valentina lay in the darkness, thinking over Rocho's words. A man only changes when the consequences of his behavior become painful for him. Maybe it was time to stop being so patient and understanding. Maybe it was time to show Alonso that his behavior had consequences. A thought was ripening in her head, bold and frightening at the same time. What if she simply disappeared for a day? See what would happen if the usual order of things was disrupted? If the one who was used to only receiving care suddenly found himself without it? Valentina turned on her side and looked at sleeping Alonso. In the darkness, his face seemed young, almost the same as it was 15 years ago. But this was an illusion. The person lying next to her had long ceased to be the man she had married. Saturday morning lay ahead, a day that could be spent differently. She could, as usual, do household chores, prepare lunch, clean the apartment, do laundry. Or she could. Valentina didn't finish the thought even to herself, but the decision was ripening in the depths of consciousness, like a seed about to sprout. Saturday began as usual, with the noise of the alarm clock at 6:30 in the morning. The habit of getting up early had taken root so deeply that even on weekends the body automatically woke up at work time. But today's morning was special, though Alonso didn't know it yet. Valentina got up quietly so as not to wake her husband. She went to the bathroom and looked at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and downturned corners of her mouth looked back. When did she become like this? When did she stop seeing herself in the mirror and start seeing only a function? Wife, mother, housekeeper. Today she didn't prepare breakfast. Instead, she quickly dressed, took her purse and wrote a short note. Gone on errands. We'll be back in the evening. Valentina. She put the note on the kitchen table next to the kettle, where Alonso would definitely see it. In the hallway, Valentina stopped for a second, listening to the silence of the apartment. Everyone was sleeping. Husband, children. Usually at this time she would already be standing at the stove, preparing breakfast for the family. Today the family would wake up and not find her at home, for the first time in 15 years of marriage. Outside stood the silence of early Saturday morning. Rare passers-by hurried about their business. Dog walkers exercised their pets. Janitors swept fallen leaves. The ordinary life of an ordinary neighborhood, where everyone was busy with their own concerns, and no one suspected that the woman walking on the sidewalk was making a small revolution in her life. Valentina walked unhurriedly, enjoying the unusual feeling of freedom. When did she last walk just like that, without purpose, without a list of things to do in her head? When did she last have time to think about herself rather than family problems? Meanwhile, at home, events were unfolding that Alonso was completely unprepared for. He woke up as usual, around 9 in the morning, stretched, yawned, and habitually listened for sounds from the kitchen. Usually by this time, Valentina was already clattering dishes, preparing breakfast. But today the apartment was suspiciously quiet. "Valentina!" Alonso shouted from the bedroom. "What about breakfast?" No answer came. Alonso frowned, pulled on his sweatpants, and went to the kitchen. The empty kitchen greeted him with unusual silence. On the table lay a note, which he read twice, not believing his eyes. "What the hell?" he muttered and began looking around, as if Valentina could be hiding in a kitchen cabinet. At that moment, Sebastian entered the kitchen, disheveled and displeased. "Dad, where's Mom? And where's breakfast?" "Mom went on errands," Alonso answered confusedly, still holding the note. "And breakfast. We'll prepare it now." "Prepare it?" Sebastian looked at his father with surprise. "You mean you're going to cook? What's so strange about that?" Alonso answered defensively, though he couldn't remember when he last cooked anything. "I'm not disabled." Paloma appeared even more displeased than her brother. "Where's Mom? She's always home on Saturdays, and why is there no breakfast?" "Mom left. Dad's making breakfast," Sebastian summarized briefly. "Dad's cooking?" Paloma sat at the table and prepared to watch an unprecedented spectacle. "I have to see this." Alonso opened the refrigerator and studied its contents for a long time, as if seeing it for the first time. Eggs, milk, bread, butter. Everything necessary for a simple breakfast seemed to be there. But how all this turned into food that simply appeared on the table every morning. "Dad," Sebastian said patiently, "maybe we'll just make sandwiches." "Sandwiches aren't breakfast," Alonso objected with dignity. "Now I'll prepare scrambled eggs." He got out a frying pan, put it on the stove, and began breaking eggs. He broke the first egg unsuccessfully, and shells got into the pan. The second broke better, but the yolk spread out. By the third egg, Alonso already had experience from the first failures. "Dad, you didn't forget the oil?" Paloma prompted. Alonso looked at the pan where the eggs were already starting to stick to the surface. "I'll add it now," he said, and poured oil directly onto the eggs. "Not like that," the children exclaimed in chorus. "You have to heat the oil first." "I know," Alonso grumbled, trying to save breakfast. The result was something between scrambled eggs and an omelet, burned in places, raw in others. The children ate silently, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances. "Where could Mom be?" Paloma asked. "She never goes anywhere on weekends." "Maybe she went to Aunt Rocio?" Sebastian suggested. "Without warning? Mom always says where she's going." Alonso listened to the children's conversations and felt growing anxiety. Indeed, Valentina never disappeared so suddenly. She always warned, left detailed instructions, prepared food in advance. And here she simply took and left, leaving a laconic note. Meanwhile, Valentina was walking through the morning city and felt as if she had thrown off a heavy backpack from her shoulders. She reached the city park where she once walked with small children and sat on a bench by the pond. Her phone was prudently turned off. The park was waking up along with the city. Runners in track suits were making morning runs. Pensioners were engaged in Nordic walking. Young mothers were pushing strollers along the alleys. The ordinary life of ordinary people, which was once her life too, and then somehow disappeared, dissolved in an endless series of obligations. Valentina sat on the bench and watched the ducks in the pond. They swam unhurriedly, occasionally diving for food. Simple, measured life, in which everyone minded their own business and didn't shift their cares onto others. Thoughts flowed slowly and calmly, without the usual haste and anxiety. When did she last have the chance to just sit and think? When did she have time for reflections that didn't concern family problems and work? At 12:30, Valentina called her father. "Papa, are you home? Can we meet?" "Of course, daughter." "What happened? Your voice sounds strange." "Nothing terrible. I just want to talk, huh?" They met in a cafe near Remigio's house. Her father was already waiting for her at a table by the window, carefully studying the menu. At 58, he remained a vigorous and energetic man, though he had noticeably aged after his wife's death 3 years ago. "Sit down, daughter," he said, standing up to greet her. "I ordered your favorite latte." Valentina sat across from her father and suddenly felt her eyes sting. How long had it been since someone remembered her preferences? How long since someone cared about her comfort? "What happened?" Remigio immediately asked, seeing his daughter's condition. "Problems with Alonso?" "Problems with me," Valentina answered honestly. "Papa, I don't know what to do. I'm tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of carrying all the problems on myself. Tired of being the only adult in the family." Her father nodded as if he had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. "He's been lying on the couch for 2 years," Valentina continued. "For 2 years I've been working alone, raising children alone, running the house alone. And he tells me about principles and worthy offers. What do the children say? The children are already used to daddy being decoration. They come to me with all questions. Sebastian said yesterday, 'You've been saying that for 2 years already.' Can you imagine? A teenager understands a situation better than an adult man." Remigio was silent, thinking over his daughter's words. "Valentina, do you want me to tell you how your mother and I got through the most difficult period in our marriage? Tell me." "It was when you were about 10 years old. At the factory layoffs began, salaries were delayed for 6 months. I started drinking then, to be honest. Not heavily, but Mom saw everything. She came home once, and I wasn't there. Not in the evening, not at night. She looked for me for 2 days, and I was sitting at a friend's place, drowning my sorrows." Valentina listened attentively. Her father rarely talked about personal things. "When I returned, Mom met me in the hallway with a suitcase in her hands. She says, 'Remigio, you have a choice. Either you pull yourself together and behave like a man, or my daughter and I are going to my sister's.' And you know what? She wasn't bluffing. The suitcase was really packed." "And what did you do?" "What could I do? I got on my knees and asked for forgiveness. The next day I went to work as a loader at the market. Small salary, but money came to the family. Then I found better work. And a year later I was already restored at the factory." "So Mama gave an ultimatum?" "Not an ultimatum, but boundaries. She showed that her patience had limits. And you know, daughter, I'm grateful to her for that. If she had continued to endure, I would have become an alcoholic. But this way I understood that I could lose the most precious thing." The conversation with her father gave Valentina much food for thought. It turns out that even the strongest marriages go through crises, but only those couples overcome them where both partners are ready to work on the relationship. Meanwhile, at home, Alonso was faced with a reality he hadn't noticed for 2 years. By lunchtime, he realized that preparing food from available products was not an easy task. There were products in the refrigerator, but turning them into something edible turned out to be more difficult than he thought. "Dad," Sebastian said, looking into the kitchen, "maybe we'll order pizza?" "What pizza?" Alonso was indignant. "I can prepare lunch." He took out potatoes and began peeling them. He peeled the first potato for about 5 minutes, cutting off the skin in thick slices. The second turned out better. By the 10th potato, he had gotten the hang of it, but realized that preparing lunch would take all day. "Where's the salt?" he asked the children. "In the left cupboard," Paloma prompted. "And the frying pans?" "In the bottom drawer." "And how do you know if the potatoes are ready or not?" The children exchanged glances. It turned out that Dad didn't know elementary things about running a household. All these years, Mom had done everything so unobtrusively that the illusion was created that food prepared itself. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Alonso's former colleague Lisandro called. "Alonso, hello. How are things with work?" "Still looking." Alonso answered habitually, stirring potatoes in the pan. Listen, we have an opening for a client relations manager. Not a top position, of course, but decent salary. Want me to talk to management? Usually Alonso immediately began explaining why such offers didn't suit him. But today, standing in the kitchen with dirty hands and trying to prepare lunch for the family, he suddenly realized that work of any level was better than no work. What kind of company, he asked. Construction materials. I know, not quite your profile, but you have sales experience. I think you'll pick it up quickly. Let's meet on Monday, talk in detail. Seriously? Lisandra was surprised. I thought you'd say again that it's not your level. My level is to work and provide for my family, Alonso answered, and was surprised by his own words. The conversation ended, and Alonso remained standing in the kitchen, holding the phone and trying to understand what had just happened. Why didn't he refuse the offer today? What had changed? What changed was that for the first time in 2 years, he found himself face to face with reality. Without Valentina, the house had turned into chaos in a few hours. The children didn't know where things were. He himself couldn't prepare the simplest food. The whole family turned out to be helpless without one person who quietly and unobtrusively carried all the household cares on herself. By 3 o'clock, the potatoes were finally ready, but looked more like porridge. Alonso tried to fry sausages but overcooked one side and left the other raw. Lunch turned out edible, but far from the standards the family was used to. Dad, Paloma said, chewing mashed potatoes, does Mom cook such food every day? Mom cooks better, Alonso honestly admitted. Much better, Sebastian added. And faster. And tastier. I get it, Alonso stopped them. Mom's great, no argument. But only now did he truly understand how much effort Valentina put into daily provision of food for the family. What seemed simple and natural required knowledge, skills, and time. After lunch, Alonso tried to clean up the kitchen, but realized he didn't know where things should go. He washed the dishes carelessly, leaving greasy streaks on the plates. Pots and pans stood wherever. Who takes out the trash? He asked the children. Mom, they answered in chorus. And who does the laundry? Mom. And who buys groceries? Mom. With each answer, Alonso increasingly understood the scale of what Valentina did every day. She wasn't just a wife and mother. She was a family household manager who coordinated all processes and solved all problems. By evening, chaos reigned in the apartment. Unwashed dishes stood in the sink, crumbs from lunch lay on the table, the floor needed sweeping, and laundry in the basket awaited washing. Alonso sat on the couch and looked at all this with horror. How did Valentina cope with all this every day and still work? At 7 in the evening, Valentina returned home. Opening the door with her keys, she immediately felt unusual smells. Something burned mixed with the smell of unwashed dishes. In the hallway lay children's sneakers that had stood neatly in the shoe rack in the morning. The kitchen greeted her with a picture of ruin. A mountain of unwashed dishes, crumbs on the table, greasy spots on the stove. It looked as if people who had entered a kitchen for the first time in their lives had been cooking here. Mom! Sebastian rejoiced, running out of his room. You're back! We already thought you wouldn't come. Mama, where were you? Paloma asked. We were so worried. Alonso appeared in the kitchen doorway with a guilty look. Valentina, finally, we here. Well, made a bit of a mess. Valentina surveyed the kitchen and was surprised by her own reaction. Instead of the usual irritation and desire to immediately clean everything up, she felt something like satisfaction. So her work was noticed after all. So the house really didn't function without her. Where were you? Alonso asked. I was worried. At mine, Valentina answered calmly. I was at mine. What do you mean? At yours. Just like that. I went to myself, sat in the park, met with Papa, just walked around the city. Alonso looked at his wife and didn't recognize her. In Valentina's voice sounded some new note, the calm of a person who had made an important decision. But you didn't warn me, he said. I didn't know what to do with the children, with food. And I know what to do every day, Valentina answered. And I don't ask anyone how to cope. A heavy and meaningful silence fell. Alonso suddenly realized that today something had changed in their relationship. Something had shifted from the dead point. and these changes were not in his favor. "Valentina," he said more quietly. "What was that? Why did you leave?" "I checked what would happen if I wasn't home for one day," she answered, starting to clear the table. "The result exceeded my expectations." And in these words was so much calm determination that Alonso felt something skip in his chest. For the first time in 2 years, he saw in his wife's eyes not fatigue and irritation, but something else. Something that made him remember the phone call with the job offer and think that tomorrow, perhaps, he should call Lissandro back. Sunday morning brought a special silence to the Escalona house. Not peaceful and cozy, but tense, like before a storm. Valentina got up early as usual, but prepared breakfast silently, without the usual bustle and care that everyone got exactly what they liked. Ordinary oatmeal, ordinary coffee, ordinary sandwich. She didn't ask anyone what they wanted for breakfast, wasn't interested in plans for the day. Alonso appeared in the kitchen at 8:30 with the cautious look of a person who didn't know what to expect from the new day. Yesterday's events left a strange feeling in consciousness, as if the familiar world had shifted from its place and now stood at an angle. "Good morning," he said, sitting at the table. "Good morning," Valentina answered briefly, not looking up from the newspaper. Before, she always asked how he slept, what he planned to do, whether something needed to be bought at the store. Today she read the news with such a look as if he were not her husband, but a random fellow traveler on a train. "Valentina," Alonso began. "About yesterday." "What exactly?" Valentina finally looked at him, and in her eyes he saw neither anger nor resentment, only calm indifference, which frightened more than any reproaches. "Well, you understand, I'm not used to it. That is, usually you do everything, and then suddenly it turned out that the house can't function without me." Irony sounded in Valentina's voice, but not malicious, rather tired. "You know, this isn't news to me. The news is that you finally noticed it." The children had breakfast silently, feeling the tension between their parents. Sebastian occasionally glanced at his mother, then at his father, trying to understand what was happening. Paloma bit her lips. At 14, she was old enough to understand that something serious had changed in the family. "Mom," she asked cautiously, "are you going somewhere today too?" "No," Valentina answered. "I'm home today." "But that doesn't mean everything will return to the old ways." "What will change?" Sebastian asked. Valentina looked at the children, then at her husband. "What will change is that I'll stop pretending that our family is normal. When one person works and runs the house, and the second lies on the couch for 2 years already." Alonso blushed. "Valentina, not in front of the children." "When then?" Valentina's voice became firmer. "We've been not talking in front of the children for 2 years about Daddy not working. For 2 years, we've been pretending this is temporary. And the children, what, are they blind? They see everything and understand everything." Sebastian fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't." "We should," Valentina said firmly. "We should, because you'll be adults soon. I don't want you to think that such a family model is normal, so that you, Sebastian, think that a man can do nothing, and you, Paloma, think that a woman should carry everything on her shoulders." "I'm looking for work," Alonso protested. "I look through job listings every day." "Looking through doesn't mean searching," Valentina answered calmly, "and especially doesn't mean working." Breakfast ended in heavy silence. The children scattered to their rooms, and Alonso and Valentina remained alone in the kitchen. "What's happening to you?" Alonso asked. "You've become different somehow. Before you understood me, supported me." "Before I was a fool," Valentina answered harshly. "Valentina, I thought that if I endured and waited, you would pull yourself together. I was wrong. Valentina, give me time." "Time?" Valentina stood up and began clearing the table. 2 years isn't enough? Fine. I'm giving you another month. Exactly 1 month to find work. Any work. And if I don't find any?" Valentina stopped, holding plates in her hands, and looked at her husband. "Then I'll make a decision about our marriage." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Alonso looked at his wife and didn't recognize her. Where had the soft, patient Valentina gone, who always found justification for his inaction. When did she become so harsh and decisive? Are you blackmailing me? He asked. I'm warning you, Valentina answered. The difference is that blackmail is a threat for gain, and I'm simply informing you of my plans. On Monday morning, Valentina woke up with the feeling that the world around had become brighter and clearer. She no longer felt that heaviness in her chest that had pressed on her for months. The words spoken yesterday freed her from the need to pretend that everything was fine. At work, boss Claudia invited her to her office. Valentina, she said, we have an opening for senior accountant. I wanted to offer it to you. Is this a promotion? Valentina clarified. Yes, and quite substantial. Salary will increase by 30%, but there's more responsibility too. Tax reporting, department coordination, conducting negotiations with banks. Before, Valentina would have refused, citing family circumstances, that there were already many things to do at home. But today she felt a surge of energy. I agree, she said. When can I start? From the 1st of next month. Are you sure? There'll be a lot of work, possible business trips. I'm ready, Valentina answered firmly. Leaving the boss's office, she thought that life was really beginning to change, and the first changes turned out to be in her favor. During lunch break, Rocio called. Valentina, how are things? Has your hubby come to his senses after yesterday? Not yet, but I gave him a condition, a month to find work. And otherwise? Otherwise, I'll be deciding the question of divorce. Seriously? Surprise sounded in Rocio's voice. I don't recognize you, friend. And how did he react? He still doesn't understand well what's happening. He thinks it's temporary clouding of reason. Do you remember I told you about Rodrigo, who saw you in the cafe? Rocio, I'm still married, Valentina stopped her. I know, but he's a very nice man. And available. Just keep in mind, there are men who know how to value a woman. The conversation with Rocio made Valentina think. What if her marriage really ended? Was it scary? A month ago, the thought of divorce terrified her. Now she thought about it calmly, as a possible variant of events. At home, an unusual picture greeted her. Alonso was sitting at the computer and typing something. Next to him lay a stack of printed sheets. What are you doing? She asked. Updating my resume, he answered without looking up. And responding to job listings? Seriously? Did you think I didn't understand that you were talking seriously? Valentina went to the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Alonso was really working at the computer. She heard the clatter of keys and sounds of email notifications. Had her ultimatum really worked? At dinner, Alonso told them, Today I called Lisandro, remember my former colleague. He offered a manager position. Tomorrow I'm going for an interview. And how's your mood? Valentina asked. Honestly, scary. 2 years without work is a serious gap in the biography. At least it's honest, Valentina noted. Before you said you were looking for something worthy. Before I was a fool, Alonso admitted. I thought time was working for me, but it was working against me. The children listened to their parents' conversation with interest. How long had it been since Daddy talked about work as a real possibility and not as a theoretical perspective? Dad, Sebastian said, what kind of work is it? Sales of construction materials. Not quite my profile, but I have experience dealing with clients. Is the salary good? Paloma was interested. Decent, plus percentage from sales. Valentina listened and thought, could it really be so simple? Was it enough to set a harsh condition and Alonso came to his senses? But why didn't he do this before? What was stopping him? In the evening, when the children had gone to their rooms, the spouses remained alone in the kitchen. Valentina, Alonso began, I understand that I behaved like a pig. For 2 years, I sat on your neck and still talked about principles. Do you understand? Fatigue sounded in Valentina's voice. Alonso, I waited so many years for you to understand this, and I only waited until I gave an ultimatum. What was I supposed to do? After the dismissal, I felt like nobody needed me. It seemed like the whole world was against me. And the family? We're not against you. We're for you. I know, but I was ashamed. Ashamed that I couldn't provide for the family. Ashamed to go to work for less money than before. And wasn't I ashamed to carry the whole house alone? Valentina raised her voice. Wasn't I ashamed to explain to the children why Daddy is home, but there's no money for their needs? Ashamed, Alonzo said quietly. I probably should have been more ashamed of that. You should have been, Valentina agreed, but better late than never. If tomorrow's interview goes well and they hire me, can we start over? Valentina was silent for a long time, thinking over her answer. Alonso, I don't know. Honestly, don't know. 2 years is a very long time. During this time, I've rethought a lot, understood a lot about us, about myself. What did you understand? I understood that I don't want to be in a relationship for the sake of relationship. I don't want to preserve marriage only because we once got married. I want to be with a man who values me and doesn't take me for granted. I value you. Now you value me when I set conditions. But 2 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, Alonzo was silent because there was nothing to say. He really perceived his wife as part of the familiar world, as a given that didn't require gratitude. I'll try, he said finally. If you give me a chance, I'll try to become the man you deserve. We'll see, Valentina answered. But no, there's no way back. I won't be silent anymore when I don't like something. Won't endure what can't be endured. In the bedroom lying next to her already sleeping husband, Valentina thought about how quickly life could change. A week ago, she was a tired woman who meekly carried the burden of someone else's irresponsibility on herself. Today, she got a promotion at work and gave her husband a harsh ultimatum. What would happen next? Would Alonso find work? And most importantly, would he really change or just wait out the difficult period and then everything would return to the old ways? Time would tell. But one thing she knew for sure, she would no longer live as she had lived these 2 years, because life is given once, and she was no longer going to spend it waiting for someone else to decide to become an adult. And tomorrow, Alonzo had to go for an interview, and a lot depended on its result. Not only the family's financial situation, but also the future of their marriage. Valentina fell asleep with the thought that for the first time in a long time, the future had become uncertain. And strangely, this uncertainty didn't frighten her. On the contrary, it gave hope that life could become better. 3 weeks flew by unnoticed, leaving behind a trail of changes that a month ago seemed impossible. Alonzo was working as a sales manager in a company trading construction materials, and every morning got up at 6:30 to be on time for the beginning of the workday. Valentina observed these changes with cautious optimism. She had lived too long in a world of unfulfilled promises to believe in a miracle at once. Valentina, said Alonzo, tying his tie in front of the hallway mirror, today we have important negotiations with a major contractor. If everything works out, this will be a serious contract. Good luck, she answered, and there was no irony or sarcasm in her voice. Just a wish for good luck to a person who had finally begun taking responsibility for his life. The children were also getting used to the new daily routine. Sebastian watched with surprise as his father got ready for work every morning. And Paloma proudly told her classmates that Daddy now sold construction materials and it was very important work. This Thursday, Valentina was returning from work by her usual route. 2 transfers, the familiar bus, the same passenger faces. But today the road home didn't seem like a heavy burden. The promotion at work had given her not only a salary increase, but also a sense of her own importance, confidence in tomorrow. Settling into her usual seat by the window, she suddenly saw a familiar face. The same man whose conversation a month ago had become a catalyst for changes in her life was sitting in the front seat and talking on the phone again. Valentina listened, hoping to hear the continuation of the story. Darling, he was saying into the phone, and his voice sounded much lighter than that first time. Mama's already being discharged from the hospital. The doctors say the operation was successful. Recovery is going faster than expected. Valentina smiled. So this unknown person also had everything working out. Of course, darling. Now we can plan vacation. I've already been looking at seaside tours. I think we both need to rest after all these worries. Thank you for your patience, for being there during the most difficult time. Listening to this conversation, Valentina thought about how important it is to be able to thank loved ones for their support. A month ago, these words echoed with pain in her heart because they showed the contrast with her own family situation. Today she listened to them with understanding and even with some joy. It's good when people's lives work out. At 6:30 in the evening, when Valentina had almost reached home, the phone rang. Alonso was calling. "Valentina, I have excellent news." His voice sounded excited. "The negotiations went wonderfully. We concluded a contract for 6 months ahead, and they gave me a bonus for successful negotiation management." "That's great," said Valentina, and for the first time in a long time she rejoiced at her husband's success sincerely. "Congratulations." "Thank you. And you know what? I bought a cake. Today we're going to celebrate." "What cake?" "Your favorite, Napoleon. Remember, we always used to buy it for special occasions?" Valentina stopped right on the sidewalk. Alonso remembered what cake she liked. When did he last pay attention to her preferences? When did he buy something especially for her? At home, an unusually festive atmosphere greeted her. A cake stood on the kitchen table. The children were dressed up, and Alonso was setting the table with such enthusiasm as if he were preparing for New Year's celebration. "Mom!" Paloma shouted, running into the hallway. "Daddy bought a cake and said today is a family holiday." "What holiday?" Valentina asked. "The day of my return to life," Alonso answered seriously, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "The day I realize I have the best family in the world." At dinner, for the first time in a long time, the whole family sat at one table and talked. They didn't sit in silence, each buried in their own affairs, but actually talked. Alonso told about work, about colleagues, about company plans. Sebastian shared school news. Paloma boasted about an excellent grade in mathematics. "Do you remember," said Alonso, addressing Valentina, "how we used to go somewhere every weekend? To the park, to the museum, to parents' dacha?" "I remember," Valentina answered. "Maybe this weekend we'll go out of town as a whole family?" "The weather is good. The air is fresh. It would be good for the children." "We can," Valentina agreed, but caution sounded in her voice. Too many promises had been broken over these years to believe in new ones immediately and unconditionally. In the evening, when the children had gone to their rooms and the dishes were washed, the spouses remained alone in the kitchen. Outside the window, the first snow was falling. Light, almost weightless, turning the familiar courtyard into a fairy tale decoration. "Valentina," said Alonso, and in his address to her sounded tenderness that hadn't been there for a very long time. "Forgive me for these 2 years. Forgive me for making you carry all the problems on yourself." "Alonso," Valentina began, but he stopped her with a gesture. "Let me finish. I was selfish and cowardly. I was afraid to go work for less salary than before, afraid to admit that my ambitions didn't match reality, and as a result, I shifted everything onto your shoulders. The main thing is that you understood this. I understood, and I also understood that I almost lost the most precious thing I have." Valentina looked at her husband and tried to understand what she felt for him now. A month ago, there was anger, disappointment, fatigue in her heart. Today, these feelings were beginning to give way to something else. Not love yet, that still needed to be grown anew, but respect, hope, the possibility of believing that people can change. "We both made mistakes," as she said. "I was silent where I needed to speak. I endured what couldn't be endured. And now? And now I won't be silent, and I won't endure. If you decide again that the couch is more important than family, I won't wait 2 years. "I won't decide that," Alonso said firmly. "I understood what it costs." They sat in the kitchen. Outside the window, snow was slowly falling, and for the first time in a long time, there wasn't that wall of silence and mutual claims between them. There were two people who were learning to live anew, build relationships anew, trust each other anew. "You know," said Valentina, "in the bus a month ago, I heard a conversation of an unknown man with his wife. He was apologizing to her, thanking her for patience. He said how dear she was to him. And I thought then, when did you last say something like that to me? And when? I don't remember. Long ago. Very long ago." "Valentina," Alonso took her hands in his, "you are the most patient, strongest, best woman in the world. Forgive me for forgetting about this. Forgive me for stopping saying this." Tears glistened in Valentina's eyes. Not from pain, as a month ago, but from relief. Finally, she heard those words she had been waiting for so long. "Words are good," she said, "but actions are more important. I'll prove it with actions. Every day." Late in the evening, Valentina called her father. "Papa, how are things?" "Good, daughter. How about you?" "Your voice sounds special somehow." "Special day today. Alonzo got a bonus at work. We celebrated as a whole family." "So everything is working out?" "It seems so. It's too early to draw conclusions, but there's hope." "Daughter, do you remember I told you about the difficult period in Mama's and my marriage?" "I remember. So the most important thing in a family is not to avoid crises, but to go through them together and come out on the other side stronger than you were." "Thank you, Papa, for support, for wise words. Always, daughter, always." A month after that conversation on the bus, the life of the Escalona family had changed dramatically. Alonso went to work in one direction of the city, and Valentina in hers. Sometimes they met in the center and rode home together, discussing the past day, making plans for the future. On one such evening, sitting next to each other on the bus and talking about where to go on vacation in summer, Valentina remembered that stranger's conversation that became a turning point in her life. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to understand what you have and find the strength to change it or preserve it. At home, they were met by children who were happy that their parents had become a team again. Alonzo helped Valentina with bags, was interested in her day, thanked her for dinner. Simple things that were once natural, then disappeared, and now returned, but consciously as a manifestation of care and respect. "Mom," Paloma said once, "I like that you and Daddy are talking again. Before you only talked about money and argued all the time." "We didn't argue," Valentina objected. "We just were going through a difficult period." "And now it's a good period?" "Now we're learning to live anew," Valentina answered honestly. "And so far it's working out." In the evening, putting the children to bed, Alonzo said, "You know what I understood during this month? Work isn't just money, it's a feeling of your own necessity, importance. When I lay on the couch for 2 years, I felt like nobody needed me. And now I know that not only the company's contract depends on me, but also our family." "And how does it feel?" "Scary and joyful at the same time. Scary from responsibility, joyful that I'm needed again." "You were always needed by the family," said Valentina. "You just forgot about it." "And you reminded me," harshly but fairly. Lying in bed that night, Valentina thought about how unpredictable life is. A month ago, she was ready for divorce, and today she and her husband are planning a family vacation. Not because problems solved themselves, but because they finally began solving them. Ahead was a lot of work on relationships, on trust, on not returning to old mistakes. But today, under the quiet sound of the first snow outside the window, the future seemed not a threat, but a promise. A promise of new possibilities, new joys, new discoveries in each other. And on the bus that would take them home tomorrow, perhaps conversations about love, care, and gratitude would sound again. And these conversations would no longer be a painful contrast to their own life, but would become simply part of the big world where people learn to value each other and don't take happiness for granted.